So, now the next speaker, I'm not sure that it's really necessary to introduce him or to present him because the floor will be given to Jacques Lochard. Jacques Lochard was the conductor of the Fukushima dialogues, but I understand here that your presentation will be more focused on ICRP views and recommendation of ICRP publication 111 in the light of the Fukushima Dialogue Initiative. Jacques, the floor is yours.
Ohayou gozaimasu. Well, it's with a lot of emotion. This is the first time that I address you from this position. During the 12 dialogues, I was, trying to facilitate the process. It was another perspective. So I tried to discuss a little bit about the recommendations of ICRP publication 111 in the light of the Fukushima Dialogue Initiative. A few words about the background of ICRP publication 111. This was the first ICRP recommendations dealing with the long-term recovery phase after a nuclear accident. All previous recommendations from ICRP were concerning nuclear accidents, were dealing mostly uniquely with short and medium-term actions just after the accident, the so-called emergency phase. So it was really important for ICRP to address this long-term recovery. The focus of publication 111 is on the protection of people. There is nothing about the protection of workers during the recovery phase at the nuclear power plant. It's only focused on people. And the publication 111 is drawing heavily on the experience of the Belarus population, but also of the Cumbria sheep farmers in UK. We have not addressed this issue during the dialogue, but we could have invited our UK colleagues. They had a long experience with in UK about how to manage the sheep in the Cumbria region in the north of UK, which was also affected by Chernobyl. And of course, it was very well presented before by Astrid, the experience of the Sami reindeer herders in Norway. I mean, ICRP publication 111 was adopted in 2008 and published in 2009, so just shortly before the Fukushima accident, and it is clear that in most countries, including Japan, there was not enough time to digest this publication. ICRP publication 111 was translated in Japanese by the Japan Radioisotope Association, and it was published in 2012, after the accident. It's important also to notice that there was an introduction to ICRP 111 that was coming from, I would say, the stakeholders. It was published also in 2012, and I think Yun Takai participated in preparing this with other colleagues, preparing this publication. And more recently, in 2015, there was a publication on the introduction, to introduce once again ICRP publication 111, I think with the cooperation between you, also Professor Niwa, Professor Ayano, and some others. I think Mokoto also participated to this publication. What are the main points? I'm trying to summarize once again what are the main points of publication 111. First, this publication is recognizing that living in contaminated areas is a complex situation, affecting all dimensions of life, and that it is not possible to manage this situation only through radiation protection consideration. This is a position that ICRP adopted right from the beginning. I mean, radiation protection will not solve all the issues related to post-accident situation. I think we have to adopt a modest attitude. We also recognize that, it was said already before, if the average level of exposure depends on the level of contamination, of course there is a clear relationship, but individual exposures are driven by the behavior and lifestyles of each of the affected people. This is very important. There is no average approach in the recovery process. You have to adopt an individual approach. This was already underlined by my colleagues before. Of course, this is the first key principle of ICMP recommendations. Decisions concerning radiological protection must be justified. What does it mean? It means that these decisions must do more good than harm. Because any action you take, you have advantages and you have disadvantages, and you have a balance to make. This justification applies in the first place in the decision to allow persons who wish so to live permanently in the contaminated areas. After a nuclear accident, you have a radiological pattern, and there is a decision to be made, and this is a decision which is in the hands of the authorities to decide where to draw the line, where people can stay or live, if they wish so or not. Because there is a level of exposure above which it's difficult to maintain the social and economical fabric. And there is a decision to be taken. It's also a problem of course, of the potential impact on health. This is certainly one of the most difficult decisions to be taken after an accident, if there is a high level of contamination. And of course, you have also to justify all decisions on protective measures to improve the radiological situation. Do we embark into large decontamination or not? What to do with in the agriculture domain and so on. And there are many, many decisions that can be taken to improve the situation, but all these decisions have also drawbacks. Decontamination has a huge impact on the environment. So how to balance all these dimensions? Exposures of people must be optimized. We discussed, this was raised yesterday by Mokoto Miyazaki, which means exposures have to be maintained as low as reasonably achievable given the prevailing circumstances. And this is the key principle this is the core principle of the radiological protection system, because we have uncertainties with the low level of exposures. ICRP already in the late 50s adopted the prudent attitude that whatever the level of exposure is, there is a risk, which is of course proportional to the level of exposure. And the optimization, what we call the optimization principle, this is just a consequence of this prudent attitude. Then we come to a very delicate point. Optimization should be implementing using a reference level, and ICRP is recommended to select this reference level from the lower part of the 1 to 20 millisievert per year band, with the long-term objective of keeping residual individual doses caused by the accident. This is the part of the exposure which is related to the accident in the range of 1 millisievert or lower. I mean, this point has been discussed since ICRP publication 111 has been published, and there are still discussions, and you have seen yesterday morning that there are still a lot of interrogations about how to interpret this recommendation of ICRP. I insist here on the fact that it is a long-term objective. ICRP was relatively fuzzy, I would say, by saying that, without not saying in 2 years or 3 years or 4 years, long-term. This is open to interpretation. But this was done on purpose. But long-term means not a few months after, it's after an accident. It means that you need some time to reflect about the situation before to make the decision. And why 1 millisievert per year? Because in the long term, it is impossible to maintain in the same society, in the same nation, 2 different criteria for what is considered as normal protection. No, this 1 millisievert per year came, and this is a way to explain the rationale of it, when a farmer in Belarus said to us, we were talking about the long-term objective of radiation protection, and he said to us, this should be 1 millisievert because this is what is applied in the rest of, in the non-contaminated territories of Belarus. We don't want to be second-class citizens. So it's a matter of equity. It's not a matter of risk. It's a matter of equity. It's a matter of ethics. The process of selecting the value of the reference level should take into account the prevailing circumstances. So this is why ICRP is not proposing a number, because Fukushima was different from Chernobyl, and maybe the next accident, if there is an accident in the future, will be different from Chernobyl and Fukushima. So the selection of the reference value will depend about the prevailing circumstances. And of course, it must be a careful process to decide about this reference level, balancing many different dimensions. And it is clearly stated in ICRP publication 111, it should include the views of all relevant stakeholders. So this implicitly this recommendation says that a reference level should normally be, for long-term recovery, should normally be the result of a process of stakeholder involvement, which means not to be decided in advance, but decided after detailed considerations about the situation. And to keep in mind that the reference level is not a limit, is not a regulatory instrument. This is a tool to guide actions aiming to reduce exposures, and particularly to identify priorities, who to protect first. Then authorities, I'm following with the next recommendation. I'm just following the ICRP publication 111 content. Authorities should establish the conditions and implement the means to facilitate the engagement of the affected population, to favor the dissemination, and this is to favor the dissemination of practical radiological protection culture and self-help protection actions. These two terms, expressions, practical radiological protection culture and self-help protection actions, were introduced in publication 111. They were directly resulting from the experience in the CIS. I don't go into details because this was very well explained by François this morning, and yesterday also Chris gave the definition about radiological protection culture, self-help protection. I think these notions are now relatively well understood. Setting up of local forums, it was not, we were talking about local forums in publication 111, not of places of dialogue, but this is the same. To share information, to evaluate protection strategy, and is the key to engage stakeholders. So it's not only to have meetings to make information, it's to share the information, to discuss this information, and to evaluate what can be done and to prepare decisions. Of course, it is the responsibility of authorities to implement an inclusive radiation monitoring system, because measurements is key. This was many times underlined during the dialogue and repeated during this workshop, and also health surveillance program. This is certainly the most difficult aspect of the recovery phase. Long-term health surveillance. There is the experience of Chernobyl, but this is not really clear. What does it mean? And I know that we discussed that many times with Makoto Miyazaki, for example. What does it mean, health surveillance in a post-accident situation? How to organize it? This is something which, in a way, remains open. Then a few words. The management of contaminated foodstuff and other commodities should take into account the interests of local producers and consumers, but also the distribution sector and the consumers outside the contaminated area. I think the third dialogue in Date in summer 2012 was a very interesting dialogue, because all the stakeholders were there, farmers, producers, consumers from Fukushima, but also consumers from outside of Fukushima, and there was also the distribution sector was represented by I think it was the vice director of E.ON, and the discussions clearly emphasized the need of this dialogue between all the stakeholders to decide how to move forward with the contaminated foodstuffs. And I remember that during this dialogue helped one of the cooperative of Fukushima to enter into a business with E.ON. And this big company accepting to distribute the products of Fukushima, and this was thanks to the discussion during this third dialogue. Well, how publication 111 was received? I have to say that there were relatively many criticisms about this publication concerning the lack of details on the practical implementation of the recommendation. You know, people say, but this is very loose on those criteria. You should be more precise and explain at what time they have to be implemented and so on. On the optimization process, and there was yesterday, Makoto Miyazaki once again raised the issue of how to implement optimization. And there was also criticisms because it's difficult to grasp, reading publication 111, it's difficult to grasp the issues at stake concerning the improvement of living conditions. We say the objective is not reducing doses in the recovery phase. The objective is to improve the living conditions of people. And how you do that is not obvious, and ICRP publication 111 is not giving many details about it, just indicating the path, the perspective. But also, you know, and here, this is a quote from Mrs. Ando. I received this message, I think in the spring 2012, and that was very important for me, but also for all my colleagues who participated to the elaboration of publication 111, because this message was pointing out a key aspect of publication 111. As I said, publication 111 was developed by colleagues with a group of radiation protection colleagues from Europe and abroad, and yeah, it was mostly European people, based on the experience of the population, of the affected population by the Chernobyl accident. And we tried in this publication not to be too technical, but to pass the message of, I would say, in our jargon we say the human dimension, as emphasized by François this morning. And when I read this message, I was really, I understood why ICRP publication 111 is difficult to grasp. Because if you have not the experience of living in contaminated territories, it's very difficult to understand the spirit of this publication. I think you had time in between to read this text, but you know, when I read that in the midst of the turmoil, ICRP 111 was the only support for our mind, then I said, okay. Despite all the criticisms, I think we have done, not a good job, but we have done our job properly. What has been the contribution of the dialogue with regard to publication 111? About the complexity of the situation. The dialogue confirmed what had been identified after Chernobyl. I mean, the loss of control over everyday life, the apprehension about the future, particularly that of children, the disintegration of family life and of the social and economic fabric, the threat on the autonomy and dignity of affected people. That was already there in Chernobyl, and however, through their testimonies and reflections, the dialogue participants have shed light on this complexity and brought words to better describe it. They told a story, which means they gave rise to the emergence of a narrative on this complexity. And I think it was difficult before Fukushima, although we identified some key points about the lessons of Chernobyl. Now it's clearer for all of us what is at stake as far as this human impact, human, social and economical impact of the accident. About those criteria. Once again, I have to say that publication 111 adopted on purpose a minimalist approach to the use of those criteria. It was on purpose that ICRP publication is not proposing a number for allowing people to stay permanently in contaminated areas, because we considered that it will depend each time of the prevailing circumstances And this is not, it would not be really useful to give a number and to trap people with this number. And we also give a range of value to select the reference value. We say in the lower part, and it's even relatively vague, in the lower part of the 120 band. So what is low? Lower part. Is it 1 to 3? Is it 1 to 5? We are sure it is 1 to 10. But we also, on purpose, decided not to give a number. The only number is this long-term objective of coming back to 1 millisievert from caused by the accident, which is 1 millisievert, an extra millisievert above the natural background, of course. The participant, it is interesting to note that the participants to the dialogue incidentally mentioned the existence of those criteria. From time to time there was, those criteria were mentioned, but they never discussed their rationale. Except yesterday morning. I mean, it was the first time yesterday morning that there was the beginning of a discussion about the rationale of those criteria. But during 12 dialogues, it was not the issue. I mean, the problem is not the dose criteria. The problem is how you rehabilitate the living conditions, and with the help of some instruments and tools. But what they discussed, what the participants of the dialogue discussed, and particularly that was a point raised by Mrs. Ando, this is the impact of the dose criteria on daily life. And particularly the fact that these dose criteria may be a blocking factor in the process of recovery. It takes quite a long time for people living in a contaminated territory to come to the point where they go along their desire, where they start to say, okay, this is what is important is in my life is this, and I am going to eat this or to do that because I know the radiological situation, but I don't care anymore about the values, the dose criteria. I know how to manage the situation for myself. The dialogues have shown that once people have access to the practical radiological protection culture, they use the dose criteria as benchmarks to make their own decision. And this is what we call self-help protection action. So that was really a clear lesson from the dialogue. It was already clear after Chernobyl, but I mean this was re-emphasized during the dialogue. About engaging stakeholders. Of course, it was said many times, the dialogue re-emphasized the crucial role of measurements to engage stakeholders, to make the invisible visible. If you want to fight the beast, this was an image that one day Mr. Ando said to me, you know, saying, someone told me, he said to me, someone told me radiation is like a wild animal, a wild beast, but it is an invisible one. If you want to fight this beast, wild beast, you have to make it visible. And he said to me, when I started to do the measurements in the Swetsegi Valley, after a while, I started to see the beast, and I started to think how I'm going to beat the beast. So it's the wild beast. So it's very important. Measurements is key. Pointed out, the dialogue pointed out the need to start measurements as quick as possible after the accident and to refine measurements as necessary with time. This is probably, and this is not related to the recovery phase, but for the emergency phase, that will be taken on board by ICRP in the update of the publications 109 and 111, is the crucial roles of the characterization of the situation as soon as possible. Doing measurements immediately to try to characterize the situation is crucial. I remember how people were lost when we had the first dialogue. It was December, end of November 2011, and even it was also mentioned by Astrid in our presentation, even in the course of 2012, people were lost. They didn't know where, when are we exposed. And it means that after an accident, this is one of the most important tasks, is to do measurements to characterize the situation. Of course, to characterize the initial situation and to follow the evolution of this situation and to adapt the protection strategy. And of course, in the long term, measurements are key to ensure vigilance. This is well illustrated, for example, in Suitsegi with the surveillance of the waste disposal site. The dialogue also confirmed the importance of places of dialogue between experts and the affected population. And these places of dialogue, this is for experts to listen. What are the concerns of the people? But also what are their expectations? It's not to educate the people. This is to listen about their concern and to understand what are the difficulties prevailing in the communities. And this is a co-expertise, because as experts, we have some knowledge about radiation, about the behavior of the radiation, about how to measure radiation, and so on and so on. But we have no expertise at all about the local conditions, living conditions of people. This is why, as it was mentioned yesterday, this is why when I met first the people in Suitsegi, and they asked me, is it risky to live here? I said, I don't know. I cannot answer. As long as I don't understand what is your situation, where do you live, in which conditions you live, I cannot answer. And this is only if we work together, that we will be able to answer to this question. But it will take some time, and it will need some technical support. It will need that some experts will work with you. So there is no other way. And of course, if you develop this practical, what we call the practical radiation protection culture, then I would say automatically, as a natural consequence, there is this development of the so-called self-help protection. This was something discussed within ICRP when we proposed this self-help protection concept. Some people said, well, we are just refusing to take our responsibilities by saying that people need to come to a point where they protect themselves. But it's not giving up with our responsibilities of experts. It's just empowering people to behave. And this is a matter of dignity. I think this is something that we repeated quite often during the ethos projects in Belarus. To us, first, experts have to put in their mind that they have to work with the population and not for the population. In the first part of my career, I was fully convinced that I was working for the people. I was developing my expertise not at the service of course, at the service of the people, but doing that for them. So just delivering what they have to do. It's not the way. We have to work with people, not for them. About sharing responsibility, it was mentioned this morning. In publication 111, the role of authorities and the population is described as complementary. You say, self-help protection on one side, but on the other side, authorities have to develop, put in place a monitoring system, have to take decisions, so it was some sort of split between what has to be done collectively and what can be done individually. I mean, the dialogue emphasized the role of communities. That was not very clear, and this is not very clear in publication 111, but this was a lesson from the dialogue, and yesterday Mr. Arima said clearly that this is also a lesson of their work with the population now. This question about how to support the return of people, those who wish to return, how to support this process. This is a community-based approach. You cannot have a fixed rule for all Fukushima prefecture. It will never work, because each community has its own specificity. And so there is clearly something that emerged, is the need to approach the recovery process through an integrated manner. And this calls certainly for establishing some sort of mechanisms to favor the cooperation between all levels. This was not clear after Chernobyl, but now I think this is something to be considered. Which type of mechanism could facilitate the cooperation between local, regional, national level in order to organize this complementary work between the authorities and what can be done at the level of individuals. Another dimension of sharing responsibility emerged during the dialogue is between generations, as emphasized by the two dialogues related to raising children and educating children. There are many other issues, and I will just, before to come to the end of my presentation, just pointing out three of these issues. Protection of children, of course, is a particular attention that is universal and which results in extra protection compared to adults. I mean, everywhere this is like this, not only with radiation protection. I mean, protecting children is a universal value. This was, I would say, this was implicit in publication because in publication 111 because there is no sentence about protecting children particularly. I mean, this is so, I would say, so natural, so obvious that there was no need to say that. We thought there was no need. But at the beginning of the dialogues, there were a lot of discussions about protection of children, with the implicit, maybe in the back, the implicit wish of some colleagues or some people to say, we need to have specific criteria for children, we need to have a specific protection for children. But the dialogue emphasized that this extra protection for children is not without drawbacks. Restriction on outside activities, overweight, this was very well discussed during the dialogue. I mean, you want to protecting children, maybe have some real drawbacks. What is the right balance? You obviously want to protect children, but by protecting them, by not allowing them to go around and play outside, there are real drawbacks in their developments. This is a question which refers to personal ethics, of course, because children are under the responsibility of their parents, and this is to their parents to make decisions about what they allow. And this is something which remains open. So I don't think ICRP is going to do any particular recommendations about children. Of course, we all agree on the fact that children have to be protected, particularly well protected, but the way to do it, we leave it open. The dialogue also helped to better understand the ethical dilemmas that was well presented by François previously. The ethical dilemmas raised by the empowerment of the affected people. Without empowering people, you know, the nuclear accidents arrive, and it was underlined also this morning, people have no clue about what is radiation protection, radiation, because for historical reasons, and also this is, this is a debate we could have, why we are living at the beginning of the 21st century, and almost all over the world, the general population has a very, very little, if not absolutely no knowledge and understanding about radiation. Who knows here that northern lights, auroras, are cosmic rays entering into the atmosphere? So, who knows that? Nobody. There are massive amount of cosmic rays entering into the whole of the magnetic sphere. We are living with radiation, but it is ignored. So, we have to empower. When an accident occurs, there is no other way to empower people, to help them to make daily decisions about how to behave. Of course, some people may say, I don't want to live anymore there, okay, and this is totally respectful, and there is no discussion about that. But people who made the choice to live in Yokohama or even further south of Japan, there is no role for radiation protection. There is no recommendation for them. I mean, they have made this choice, okay. We, as radiation protection professionals, we are dealing with those who wish to stay in their place and to live with the contamination. How can we help them to protect themselves properly, effectively, and to remain citizens, respectful and citizens, and with autonomy and dignity? This is what is at stake for us. Finally, the dialogue highlighted the key role of the transmission of past experience. I think the presence of Belarus colleagues and Norwegian colleagues during the dialogues was absolutely crucial. Sharing experience, that's the key point. Mrs. Cano explained how it was important for her to visit Belarus, to visit Norway, and to talk face to face with those who had the experience. And of course, also what emerged clearly during the dialogue is how to maintain solidarity between the contaminated areas and the outside. And I mean, Yoon Tak-ai is a clear example and fantastic example of how we can organize this solidarity. Solidarity is not only to give support, material support. Solidarity is also with the minds, the way to look at things. This is very, very important. Just before my concluding slide, I'd like to present this slide, which is a reflection based on publication 111. Those who read publication 111, some of Japanese colleagues that read publication 111, they came to the conclusion that the key principles for recovery is first to be prudent, even though the absolute amount of the risk is small, but its existence should be assumed. This is a way to express the prudent attitude that ICRP is putting at the basis of its system. Second principle, tolerability should be determined by the risk taker. This is something which is revolutionary. This is those who are at risk who have to decide what risk they want to take. It's not for outsiders to decide for them. The tolerability of the risk should be judged by the people who take the risk together with experts. This is where experts have a little role to play in this. This is the co-expertise based on the actual measurements, the role of measurements. I think these three principles, this slide, everything is there in these slides. And be reasonable. Avoid extreme and carefully adjust conflicting interests, because we are always dealing with conflicting interests. Day-to-day life is just a series of dilemmas all the time. How to make these dilemmas as normal part of life and not being under stress all the time. We are living every day with dilemmas. Should I go to do this? Should I ask my children to make this? Yes? No? Okay. We are dealing with dilemmas all the day. And this is the conclusion of the people of ethos in Fukushima. These three human judgments cannot be described by numbers. This is why we want to keep things minimalist in ICRP as regards to criteria for recovery. I mean, this is for us a good lesson. My concluding remarks. The dialogue confirmed that radiation protection must be at the service of the rehabilitation of living conditions. It was said so many times. That is to say, the restoration, what is at stake at the end? This is the dignity and the well-being of people. The dialogue did not raise new issues concerning the protection of people, calling for a significant change of the recommendations of publication 111. We don't think there is need to drastically change publication 111. However, the dialogue brought several important clarifications, and the challenge for ICRP is now to incorporate these clarifications in the update of publication 111, which is currently under development. And this incorporation will be the contribution of the Fukushima people to the transmission of their experience. And I have to say that we are doing the update. ICRP is in the process of updating publication 111, also with publication 119, and we are doing this with Japanese stakeholders. There is a group of Japanese people cooperating with ICRP to update these publications. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Jacques, for this brilliant presentation. You're perfectly on time. And clearly, it's not criticism. Indeed, your presentation was very interesting regarding this presentation of ICRP 1, publication 111, regarding the outcomes of the Fukushima dialogue, and indeed a challenge for ICRP would be to clearly incorporate the lessons learned from this Fukushima dialogue. We are on time, but before a coffee break, is there any question from the audience? Yes, there is. There are.
時間が超過している中で1個だけというか昨日オプティマイゼーションに言及をしたわけですが、福島県の宮崎です。今のジャックのお話は多分議論を始めたら多分いつまでも時間が 時間が一切足りないので、ちょっと議論というか今感じたコアなところをこの場で共有した方がいいんじゃないかと思うところだけちょっと2点ほど、おっしゃってることは多分4年半日本が経験していることを相当具体的な言葉ではなくて相当反映されていることを感じます。でなんで僕はこんな高い位置でそんなこと言うことないんですが、僕が昨日オプティマイゼーションに言及をできるのはなんでかっていうと、たまたまその説明者という位置に自分が入って、国のやっていることを、つまり規制当局がやっていることと、放射線防護の自助というものをなんていうか両方説明するような立場にたまたま入った。で、それを考えた時に先ほどおっしゃった2点は、規制当局が、扱うためのそのツールではないところが日本、特に海外の皆さんに知っていただきたいのは、日本の住民の多くはこれは規制当局が扱っているというふうに認識を多分しています。そこに大変まず矛盾が生じて、現場で自助は多分その線量を知ったりとか自分が測ったりすることで非常に納得はいきますが、その規制当局のやっていることについて矛盾があるので、ものすごく、乖離が生じます現場で。それを私は知ってて飲み込みつつ説明もしますからいいんですけど、やっぱり多くの方はその説明者側がそれを飲み込めない、なので111にはもちろんそういうもう今おっしゃった通り、規制当局が扱うツールではないということをもう作った方がおっしゃってるわけですけど、やはりそうでない現実というのが日本にはどうしてもどうもあると。で、一方でもう一つオプティマイゼーションの問題のもう一つは、自助というものが働くそのシチュエーションが非常に限定される。個人が測ったものについてやはり自分がそれをコントロールできる、またはその何か対策があるということを、できるシチュエーションが外部被曝には極めて少ないある時期以降ですね。ということをやはり問題の一つとして吸い上げていただけるといいなと。もう一個2つといつもう一個です。今のお話を聞いてて ICRP111 には多分チェルノブイリのオマージュが含まれているんだなということをなんか改めて感じました。で、なんでかっていうと、一体あそこは何から見放されていたかと。でそれに対して入ったのは相当後、例えば10年とかの後だと思うんですけども、つまりさまざまなものから見放されていた状況から入ってるんですが、日本の場合はむしろすごくクローズな、なんていうか対策や、介入やそういったものが初期から多く入っています。ところがチェルノブイリとは違った形で多分見放されているものもたくさんどうもある。一つは医療や、健康の部分で、それはですね、これは日本向けなのかもしれませんが、多分その震災の前から抱えている構造的な問題が、チェルノブイリもそうなのかもしれません。見放されたその10年間はもともとソ連が抱えていた問題かもしれない。で、今日本が抱えているのはやっぱり震災の前から起こっていた問題の多くがある。でやはり事故が起こった時に歪みが来るのはそういうことなんだなということで、3つここにいらっしゃる皆さんが、になんとなく現場で上と下を見ているものが感じた部分を共有していただくと、多分こんな場は他にチャンスがないと思うので、今言った3つのことを規制当局がツールとしてどうも使っているように見える。それから、自助にも限界があると。もう一つは、やはり構造的問題がどんな国でも多分抱えている構造的問題が表面化するということを3つ 述べておきたいと思います。
Thank you, Makoto, for your comment. We could have a dialogue on the issue that you raised. This is this question about sharing responsibility between authorities and all the other stakeholders. And optimization is just a word to say that the objective is to reduce, to keep things under control as much as reasonable. And there are a large spectrum of doing optimization. You can, if you are working on a decontamination plan, you can do some calculations about the effectiveness of your decontamination, what will it cost, and what will be the side effects of these decontaminations. And you can do, if you are in Suitsegi, you are not going to do any calculation. I mean, this is common sense that will prevail. The problem is that so far, it was the case in Belarus, it is the case here in Fukushima. These two, I would say these two perspectives are running a little bit, they are complementary, but they are running in parallel without any dialogue between them. And I think this is probably the challenge for the next, if there is any time another accident, I hope not, of course. But this is the challenge, is how we can combine this collective approach with this individual approach. And in my view, optimization in a post-accident situation must remain something very flexible, not entering into numbers and calculations and so on and so on. It must be driven by common sense, taking into account the prevailing circumstances. And what is extremely important is how you embark stakeholders in both for the self-help protection, but also for the collective protection actions. For example, I mean, all the decontamination, I saw that in Suitsegi. You know, I was even a little bit shocked when I was invited to go in Suitsegi at the time of the decontamination of Suitsegi. I remember very well, we visited a farm or a house that was decontaminated. We made a few measurements outside to see what's the situation and so on. And at one moment I said, I would really like to discuss with the owner of this house to have his view about the decontamination. And the guy in charge of decontamination said, oh, the owner is not here. When we said to him that we are going to decontaminate the house, he said, okay, I go away. And then I was shocked, because I said, well, you know, all people in Suitsegi, when I came before, when the government is starting the decontamination, why are we neglected in Suitsegi? We want to have the decontamination. And the day where there is the decontamination, the owner of the house is going away. I mean, there is a problem here. Not because it's the system of the authorities and the potential engagement of the citizens is totally disconnected. And this is because I think in the post-accident situation, citizens have a right to be part of the discussions related to what will be done. I mean, the decontamination plan was probably a good decision in Japan, but the way it has been implemented was extremely rigid, driven totally top-down, and I think probably it would have been much more effective to involve the communities and the people themselves to discuss about what should be decontaminated. I think in the way that Junichiro Tada made at the beginning of just after the accident. I will never forget that the dialogue, we are here together because I met Junichiro Tada in September 2011, and he told me, oh, we are involved in decontamination work in Date City. Oh, I say, interesting. And he said, yeah, we do that with the population. Wow. And he showed me some slides, PowerPoint presentation, and I saw Unichiro, with people. There was even young children participating to the process and so on. I mean, young children, you know, maybe 15 years old, 17 years old, participating to the process. I said, this is really rehabilitation like in Belarus. And he said to me, well, but it's difficult because authorities are now planning to have a decontamination program, and they want us to follow strict rules, and it's a difficult difficult dialogue with, he didn't use dialogue, he said difficult relationship with the authorities. And this is where I said, you know, we have been facing exactly the same problems in Belarus, exactly the same. No connection between authorities and the citizen. And this is how we said, okay, the only way is to put people around the table and to discuss. Now I'm so pleased that there is a representative here of the government to listen with us and to discuss and to work, to think about how we can together improve the situation and be more effective. I think but the lesson of Chernobyl, like the lesson of Fukushima, it takes a long time. It's impossible to decide that in a few months, because it's a matter of maturation. It's a matter of digestion of what is really at stake. You need time. Sorry for it was part. I will say nothing during the panel.
You're still allowed to speak, but we have one last question before the break.
Please excuse me to ask in English, because this is a continuation of an issue raised in ICRP 2015. Since you're representing ICRP in this session, Monsieur Rocha, I'd like to ask your views on the roles and responsibilities of radioactive protection professionals, especially during emergency phase. Why I ask this is back in April 2011, at that time, as a citizen, I did not know what ICRP was, nor ICRP 111. There was a notorious TV interview by the then Prime Minister's advisor. He is a famous radioactive protection specialist, and he cried in front of the TV camera, saying that the government's dose limit was unacceptable from humanistic viewpoint. And I think that really drove the citizens to distrust what the government is doing. So in light of that experience, I'd like to ask you what you think about the performance of the Japanese Army professionals during the emergency phase, and if there's a lesson in case of another accident, which we don't hope, what you'd like the Army professionals to act in emergency, existing and long-term situations. Thank you.
Tatsuko.
You have 20 seconds to answer.
No. No, I propose that we discuss that during, because everyone is waiting now for the. This is a good question, and I will answer as much as I can. But let's do that after the break, okay?
Thank you, Jacques. It's more reasonable. So I propose to have a 10 minutes coffee break, and we'll resume our work at 25 past 11.